Welcome to Imperial History, the podcast where we explore the epic stories of empires that shaped the world, from their triumphant rises to their dramatic falls. I'm your host, Eric Alexander. Picture this. It's the year 626, and the world hangs in the balance of empires. The Sasanid Empire, under the reign of Khosrow II, is a juggernaut, an ancient superpower with ambitions as vast as its armies. Its trusted general, Shahrbaraz, commands legions of battle-hardened soldiers. At his side are the Avars, a fierce nomadic confederation whose ferocity strikes fear into the hearts of their enemies. Their target? Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, a city of towering walls and immense strategic value. To conquer it would be to break the back of the Byzantines. The Avars, eager to share in the spoils of victory, join Shahrbaraz in a coordinated siege. Together, they seem unstoppable. But Constantinople, even under siege, is no ordinary city. Its defenses, both physical and spiritual, are legendary. For months, the city holds out against wave after wave of assault. Then comes the pivotal moment, the moment that changes everything. The Avars, sensing the tide of fortune turning against them, lose their nerve. They abandon their Sasanid allies and retreat. Shahrbaraz, a brilliant tactician, finds himself stranded. Without the Avars' manpower, the siege becomes untenable. Reluctantly, he orders a retreat. For the Byzantines, it's a breath of relief, but for Khosrow, it's humiliation. And Khosrow II does not take humiliation lightly. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius is fighting a war on multiple fronts. A master strategist, he understands the stakes. He dispatches his brother Theodore with reinforcements to relieve Constantinople, knowing the city must not fall. Khosrow, desperate to salvage his ambitions, sends another trusted general, Shahin, to intercept Theodore's forces. Shahin is no stranger to victory. His name commands respect throughout the empire. But this time, fate, or perhaps exhaustion, overconfidence, or Byzantine cunning, betrays him. His army is utterly annihilated. Shahin, the once proud general, does not die on the battlefield, sword in hand, as one might expect. Instead, illness claims him. But even death offers him no peace. Khosrow's fury knows no bounds. To lose a siege, to lose an army, and now to lose a general, this is too much for the King of Kings. His wrath is volcanic. In a shocking display of disdain and desperation, he orders Shahin's corpse desecrated, a grim testament to the unraveling of Khosrow's once iron grip on his empire. By the time Theodore arrives at Constantinople with his reinforcements, the siege is over. The city has survived, not through relief forces, but through its own resilience and the failure of its enemies. For the Byzantines, it's a triumph, a turning point in a conflict that has brought them to the brink. For Khosrow, it's a bitter humiliation, one that foreshadows the decline of his empire. And for us, it's a moment that encapsulates the chaos, brutality, and sheer unpredictability of war in the ancient world. Khosrow II, the King of Kings, is beside himself with fury. The failure to take Constantinople, a moment he likely envisioned as his crowning triumph, has instead become a turning point in a war that was supposed to reassert Sasanid dominance. The humiliation festers, and in his rage, Khosrow makes a decision that will send shockwaves through the ranks of his own empire. He pens a letter to the second-in-command of Shahrbaraz's army. The message is chilling. Assassinate Shahrbaraz, take command of the army, and bring the troops back to Ctesiphon. It's an extraordinary order, one that reeks of desperation. But history, as it so often does, twists the narrative. The letter never reaches its intended recipient. Instead, it falls into the hands of Byzantine soldiers who recognize the immense value of what they've intercepted. They deliver the letter to Emperor Heraclius, who is deep in the planning stages of what will become one of the most audacious military campaigns of the ancient world. Heraclius sends a message to Shahrbaraz, inviting the veteran Persian general to Constantinople. Now picture this scene. Shahrbaraz, a man who has waged relentless campaigns against Byzantium, who threatened Constantinople itself, enters the city not as a conqueror, but as a guest. Imagine the tension in the air as he stands before Heraclius, the emperor he has fought against for years. Heraclius, calm and calculating, presents the intercepted letter. The contents of the letter are a dagger to Shahrbaraz's heart. His own king, the man he has loyally served, has marked him for death. It's a betrayal of the highest order, and Heraclius plays it masterfully. He exposes Khosrow's treachery, and then, with the skill of a diplomat who knows exactly when to twist the knife, offers Shahrbaraz an alternative, defect. And Shahrbaraz does. But here's the thing. He doesn't just switch sides quietly. In a move of cunning brilliance, Shahrbaraz takes the intercepted letter and forges additional names onto it. Suddenly, every high-ranking officer in his army has reason to fear they might be next on Khosrow's list. It's a stroke of genius. The officers remain loyal, not out of love for Shahrbaraz, but out of sheer self-preservation. With his army still under his command, Shahrbaraz leads them out of Anatolia, not toward Ctesiphon, as Khosrow had ordered, but into northern Syria. It's a defiant move that leaves Khosrow reeling. His trust in his commanders has been shattered, his armies are splintering, and his once unassailable position is crumbling before his eyes. In just a matter of months, Khosrow loses not one, but two of his most trusted generals, Shahrbaraz to defection and Shahin to death and posthumous desecration. His most powerful armies lie in ruins or beyond his command, and the dream of resurrecting the glory of the Achaemenid Empire has become a waking nightmare. Heraclius, now secure in the knowledge that Constantinople was safe, wasn't content to simply defend his empire. He wanted to go on the offensive, to strike at the heart of the Persian juggernaut. To do so, he forged a remarkable alliance with the Gökturks, a nomadic confederation whose ferocity on the battlefield was matched only by their reputation for ruthlessness. Together, these unlikely allies set their sights on Derbent, the Persian fortress that loomed over the Caspian Sea. Derbent was situated at the narrow pass between the Caspian and the Caucasus Mountains. It was the gateway to the Persian heartlands. For centuries, it had stood as an impregnable barrier, but Heraclius wasn't playing by the usual rules. The combined forces of the Byzantines and the Gökturks overwhelmed Derbent's defences in a campaign as brutal as it was decisive. When the fortress fell, the unthinkable had happened. Persia's gateway was breached. The consequences were catastrophic for the surrounding regions. The Gökturks, living up to their fearsome reputation, ravaged the countryside as they advanced. Villages were torched, populations massacred, and the land left in ruin. The collapse of Derbent sent shock waves through the Sasanid Empire, but Heraclius wasn't about to stop there. With Derbent secured, he turned his attention westward to Tbilisi. The city, another crucial Persian stronghold in what is now Georgia, was a thorn in Heraclius's side. But Tbilisi was no easy target. The siege dragged on for months, draining resources and testing the patience of both the Byzantine and Gökturk forces. Heraclius, ever the pragmatist, made a bold decision. Leaving a contingent behind to maintain the siege, he shifted his focus to a far more lucrative prize, the breadbasket of the Persian Empire, Mesopotamia. This was the heart of Persia's wealth, the land that had fed its armies and sustained its grandeur for centuries. Heraclius's campaign into Mesopotamia would reach its climax in the winter of 627 at the Battle of Nineveh. The audacity of this campaign cannot be overstated. Conventional military wisdom dictated that armies avoided major campaigns in winter. The risks were enormous. Supply lines could freeze, soldiers could starve, and morale could crumble. But Heraclius wasn't concerned with convention. He was playing for the highest stakes. Leading his forces through snow-covered terrain and icy winds, Heraclius defied expectations. The Sassanids, confident that no major offensive would come in such conditions, were caught completely off guard. But this gamble came at a steep cost. The Göktürks, unwilling to endure the brutal winter, abandoned the campaign. Heraclius pressed forward with less than half the forces he could have commanded, pushing deeper into enemy territory with an army worn by the elements but driven by the determination of their leader. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic confrontations of late antiquity. At the Battle of Nineveh, Byzantine cavalry executed daring feints, creating the illusion of disarray and vulnerability in their lines. It was the kind of maneuver that could only work against an enemy eager for a decisive blow, a trap set for those who couldn't resist the promise of an easy victory. And the Persians took the bait. Believing they had spotted a weakness, they abandoned their defensive positions and surged forward, confident they were about to deliver a crippling blow to the Byzantines. But what they saw as a golden opportunity was a carefully laid snare. As the Persian forces advanced, they became overextended, their formations thinning as they pushed deeper into the rugged battlefield. Then came the hammer blow. From the hidden folds of the terrain, Byzantine heavy infantry and reserves erupted in a devastating counter-assault. It was a perfectly timed ambush, as if Heraclius had choreographed the battle like a dance. The Persian forces, caught in a trap they hadn't even realized they'd walked into, found themselves surrounded. Panic set in. What had started as a confident charge turned into a chaotic retreat, only there was nowhere to run. The slaughter that followed was relentless. The Byzantines pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency, cutting down Persian troops with an almost mechanical precision. The once proud Sasanid army, the very force that had threatened to overrun the Byzantine Empire not long before, was utterly decimated. By the battle's end, half the Persian army lay dead on the field, their bodies a grim testament to Heraclius's victory. Survivors fled in disarray, their cohesion shattered, their spirit broken. This was more than just a military defeat. It was a moment of strategic collapse for the Sasanid Empire. With its armies in tatters, there was no one left to stand in Heraclius's way. The Persian resistance, once the stuff of legend, was now a hollow shell. For Heraclius, the road to victory was no longer a narrow, perilous path. It was a wide-open avenue. For Khosrow and his empire, the clock was ticking. Khosrow II, the man who had dared to dream of an empire as glorious as that of Cyrus or Darius, now found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making. He had been Parvez, the victorious, a ruler whose conquests stretched from the edges of the Arabian desert to the gates of Constantinople. Now, his dreams of resurrecting the Achaemenid Empire had proven not just unattainable, but catastrophic. The defeat at Nineveh had broken more than just his army. It had shattered the very foundation of his authority. Years of unending war had drained the empire's resources to the point of collapse. The treasury, once overflowing with tribute and plunder, was now empty. The economy, burdened by the costs of war and the disruptions of invasions, was in tatters. Perhaps most damning of all was the loss of faith among the nobility, the class that had long been the bedrock of Sasanid power. These were men whose wealth had been squandered to fund Khosrow's grand ambitions, whose lands had been exposed to the pillaging of nomads and enemy forces, and whose loyalty had been strained to the breaking point. By 628, the writing was on the wall. The nobility began to plot the removal of the man they now blamed for Persia's ruin. Leading the charge was none other than Khosrow's own son, Kavad II. It was the ultimate betrayal, but also, in the eyes of the conspirators, a necessary act to salvage what little remained of the Sasanid state. Kavad moved swiftly. Khosrow, the once mighty King of Kings, was arrested and imprisoned, his authority stripped away like so much gilding from a tarnished statue. The final chapter of Khosrow's life is almost too tragic to believe. The man who had once stood as a symbol of Persian pride and ambition now languished in a dungeon, a captive of his own son. And then, in a move that epitomized the brutality of the age, Kavad, at the urging of his nobles, ordered his father's execution. Khosrow's downfall is a tale that transcends its historical context, resonating with archetypal stories of ambition spiraling out of control. It's the kind of narrative that could fit seamlessly into the pages of Shakespeare or the frame of a Martin Scorsese film. And when I think about Khosrow's collapse, I can't help but be reminded of Nicky Santoro, Joe Pesci's unforgettable character in Casino. Nicky, like Khosrow, starts as a force to be reckoned with, bold, ambitious, and seemingly unstoppable. But what makes these figures captivating is also what leads to their undoing: hubris. For Nicky, it's his inability to control his impulses, his reckless disregard for the delicate balance of power. For Khosrow, it's the unyielding pursuit of glory, the refusal to see the limits of his ambitions even as the walls of his empire began to crumble. In Casino, Nicky's downfall is as brutal as it is inevitable. His own men, the people who had once followed him, decide they've had enough. The betrayal is swift, merciless, and final. As Nicky lies dying in a shallow grave, Robert De Niro's voice delivers the cold truth. The bosses had enough, they had enough. How much were they going to take? Khosrow's end feels eerily similar. This was a man who, like Nicky, believed in his own invincibility, who alienated the very people whose loyalty he depended on. The conclusion of the Byzantine-Sasanid War is soaked in irony, the kind that history seems to delight in. Heraclius secured his triumph not through numbers, not through overwhelming strength, but by daring to do what most would have called impossible. He marched his army through the brutal winter, forcing his men to endure unspeakable hardship to catch the Persian forces unprepared. The gamble paid off spectacularly, delivering a decisive blow that broke the Sasanid Empire's back and ended a war that had dragged on for decades. And yet, there's a haunting parallel here. The very act that crowned Heraclius in victory, marching his men into battle in winter, was the same gamble that had destroyed his predecessor, Emperor Maurice. Decades earlier, Maurice had tried to press his soldiers into a winter campaign, only to face mutiny. That mutiny didn't just end his reign, it sparked the chain reaction that ignited the war in the first place. Maurice was overthrown, executed, and remembered as a man who pushed too far. But now, in a strange twist of fate, the Byzantine army had redeemed itself. What Maurice failed to achieve, Heraclius accomplished, turning the brutal cold into a weapon against an unsuspecting enemy. The war ended with the Treaty of 628, signed between Heraclius and Kavad II, the son of the deposed and executed Khosrow II. It was, in many ways, a return to the status quo antebellum. All territories captured during the war were to be returned to their original owners. But there was something deeper, something symbolic, that marked the end of this war. The Sassanids agreed to return all captured relics to the Byzantines, including the most treasured artifact of all, the True Cross. Heraclius returned to Constantinople as a hero, celebrated with a triumph that echoed the glory of Rome's imperial past. But it wasn't just Constantinople that bore witness to his triumph. When Jerusalem, ravaged during the war, was handed back to the Byzantines, Heraclius himself brought the True Cross back to the city. Imagine the scene. The emperor, garbed in the finery of a victorious general, walking solemnly into Jerusalem, carrying the symbol of Christendom's faith. For the Byzantines, it wasn't just the end of a war, it was a moment of spiritual redemption. Kavad II's reign was as brief as it was tragic. His ascent to the throne, drenched in betrayal and patricide, marked the beginning of a catastrophic endgame for the Sasanid Empire. Kavad succumbed to a plague that swept through the shattered empire like a biblical scourge, taking not only his life, but countless others. His death left the throne to his son, Ardashir III. Ardashir's rule proved even shorter than his father's. In a ruthless grab for power, the ambitious general Shahrbaraz seized the throne, killing the young king in the process. Yet Shahrbaraz's triumph was hollow. His reign lasted a mere 40 days before he too was struck down in an assassination. The throne of Persia, once a symbol of imperial stability and majesty, became a grim carousel of rulers, each one ascending only to be violently cast down. Between Khosrow's execution in 628 and the dawn of the Arab invasions in 632, no fewer than 14 men wore the crown. This was no mere political instability, it was an implosion. Civil wars ravaged the empire as factions vied for power, tearing apart what remained of central authority. Political assassinations became the norm, and the Sassanid court transformed into a blood-soaked stage where ambition met its grisly end. The chaos spilled beyond the palace walls. The population, already battered by decades of war, faced famine, plague, and unrelenting hardship. It is said that as much as half the Sasanid Empire's population perished during this period. Amid this devastation, a haunting echo of a lost opportunity stands out. Before Khosrow's downfall, Heraclius had sent a final message, a plea for sanity in the face of mutual destruction. The Byzantine emperor wrote, "I pursue and run after peace. I do not willingly burn Persia, but am compelled by you. Let us now throw down our arms and embrace peace. Let us quench the fire before it burns up everything." Heraclius, a man who had endured unimaginable hardship to reclaim his empire, was offering an olive branch. But Khosrow, blinded by his hubris, refused. That refusal sealed not only his own fate, but also the fate of his empire. What followed was a chain reaction of assassinations, civil wars, and societal collapse, each event feeding into the next like dry timber in a raging inferno. Had Khosrow heeded Heraclius's words, perhaps Persia might have stabilized. Perhaps it could have recovered, rebuilt, and preserved its strength. The tragic irony is impossible to ignore. In 632, when the Arab armies swept out of the Arabian Peninsula, they faced a Persian empire fractured and leaderless, its defenses in tatters. The Sasanid Empire, which had withstood centuries of threats, was utterly unprepared to repel this new, unified, and determined foe. The Arab conquests not only obliterated the Sasanid dynasty, but also irrevocably altered the balance of power in the region. Persia fell, and with it a cultural and political lineage stretching back over 4 centuries. For Byzantium, the victory over Persia was Pyrrhic. The empire was so weakened by decades of war that it too struggled to withstand the Arab onslaught. Heraclius had little time to savour his victory. The flames of one war simply fed the fires of the next. What followed was a period of decline that would see the Byzantine Empire slowly fragment over the centuries. The collapse of the Sasanid Empire was more than the fall of a dynasty. It was a tectonic shift in human history. The Arab caliphates that emerged reshaped the cultural, religious, and political landscapes of the Middle East and beyond. Islam spread like wildfire, transforming societies from Persia to Iberia. Meanwhile, Byzantium became a diminished power, its territory shrinking under the relentless pressure of external foes. The echoes of this period reverberate through history, a reminder of how even the greatest empires can fall to the twin forces of internal decay and external pressure.